I don't have any independent knowledge of any of these cases. And police officers, especially going to domestic situations, it's a very difficult job. But there was a shooting in Highland as relates to a domestic issue, and the individual was shot twice. I got the information here.
Yeah, man killed by police during struggle.
27-year-old.
27-year-old Highland man, according to the Times, was shot and killed by police during a violent domestic disturbance at his apartment early Tuesday. That's Josh Jones. And just to summarize, evidently the cops were called to a domestic situation, and then the guy started attacking one of his female relatives, and they got in a big melee, grabbed the baton, hit the guy over the head. They tasered him twice.
They reached for the gun.
And finally, they were reaching for the gun, and finally the guy just shot him multiple times.
And there's another one that occurred yesterday in Calumet City, an autistic teen. The parents are told that this individual, who is 15 years old, but I guess he was 5'10", 220 pounds, if the parents are having problems with them, that they should call the police and have the police intervene to get him to go to school or whatever they needed. They had been to the home approximately 10 times before to deal with this individual, and this time he basically went into the basement. He had a butter knife. This is, again, the statements by the family that were on the news yesterday and also in the paper this morning, and that he actually slashed one of the officers, and the officers both fired their weapon at the individual, and he died as well. So you have two shootings in a short period of time. One was a 15-year-old autistic teen. The other one's a 27-year-old man from Highland. So in this instance, and I heard some of the callers yesterday talking about, well, why didn't they try to wound him and so forth. And I've done a lot of civil rights cases in reference to police actions. The police are taught to fire center mass, meaning trying to hit you in your, basically the center of your body, and that's what they're taught to do. If they're going to pull their weapon, even pulling it is considered deadly force, so if they're going to pull their weapon, they're going to aim center mass. They're not going to try to do a trick shot and try to wound somebody or something along those lines. They're also taught not to fire warning shots. You do not fire the gun up in the air. You don't fire it anywhere to basically warn somebody. If you're going to pull your gun, it's deadly force, and you are to fire center mass. So that's what the standards are. Now, if you are going to make a claim that these officers, and again, we've heard some callers say, well, why'd they do this? You know, wasn't it excessive? Shouldn't they have tried to do something else? The officers are also taught along a continuum of force that they start out by trying to verbal commands, then, you know, physical, arm locks, and so on, and they move up to mace, tasers, and then deadly force. So if you're going to claim that an officer's used deadly force during the context of an arrest, investigatory stop, or a seizure, you look to the Fourth Amendment to see whether or not it was reasonable. In determining whether the actions of the officers are reasonable, you need to balance the nature and quality of the intrusion on the individual's Fourth Amendment rights against the government interest of basically the officers and society being safe. So in making this determination, the officer's actions are judged objectively in a reasonable light under the facts and circumstances confronting them. And, which is also important, you can't look back 2020. I mean, you can't be that Monday morning quarterback and look at the officer's conduct. Well, clearly, you know, even though he had his hand in his pocket and he's acting like he had a gun, it really wasn't a gun, so therefore the officer's actions were unreasonable. You have to look at what the officer knew immediately to and at the time of the act of deadly force. So if this individual is brandishing a knife and he slashes the officer, clearly the officer is entitled to use deadly force to protect him or the life of another individual. In the situation in Highland, I don't know all the facts and circumstances, but if somebody's grabbing the gun, if they've attempted to use the other items along the continuum of force, then there's the issue of whether or not it was objectively reasonable based upon what the officers were confronting. Somebody's grabbing for your gun, and you get the gun, and there's a tussle over it. You know, you're going to look at the officer, what he knew at that moment in time, and then you're going to judge whether it was reasonable.